One.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, May 15, 2019 edition of our little weather get-together, and we're happy that you are joining us tonight. We hope that you've enjoyed this little bit of a cooler weather time that we've seen here over the Carolinas. So I hope you enjoyed that because it's definitely not sticking around. We'll talk a little bit more about the impending heat wave. I guess we can call it heat wave coming over the next 7 to 10 days. But this is show number 277. We want to welcome to the program Dr. David Roueche. He is assistant professor of civil engineering at Auburn University, as well as the assistant director of STEER Network. We'll let David talk a little bit about that later on. And Stephen Strader. He is assistant professor of the Department of Geography and Environment at Villanova. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. We are happy to have you on. We're going to be talking a little bit about tornadoes and tornado vulnerability and why tornadoes are a little bit different here in the Southeast than, let's say, in the Great Plains. So we're going to be talking about that. We are in the heart of severe weather season, so hopefully you'll be able to find some good information tonight, and you'll be able to apply that to your everyday lives if we are to see more severe weather, which we probably will between now and the next month or so. But again, this is show 277. We'd love for you to interact with us tonight. You can do that one of many different ways. We are streaming right now on Facebook Live and Periscope, on Twitch, and our YouTube page. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put those into the little comment bar. We'll be monitoring that throughout the show. And if you're listening on our podcast version, we'll let our guests towards the end of the show give out any social media accounts or websites that you can learn more about the research, or you can direct questions to them. So again, we are talking about tornado vulnerability. So I'll bring in our guests tonight, Mr. David and Stephen. Thank you guys for joining us. And you are a newbie to the show, so we're going to give you our newbie question, our first time guest question. How did you get caught up in this crazy world that we all live in, this weather world? Stephen, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a question that we all like to be asked, but I vividly sort of always grew up as someone who was very interested in the arts and sciences, and I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. And in 2005, in November, a tornado hit my hometown of Evansville, Indiana. It was an EF3 tornado that went right through the heart of a mobile home complex, and it killed 26 people. And I just vividly remember that being something that I kept coming back to, wondering why. And I sort of set off this course of earning my undergrad and my master's and my PhD, and I've sort of come full circle now, where I've begun to focus a lot of my research on tornadoes and mobile home residents.
All right, and then for me, so spring of 1994, Twister came on in our home for the very first time, and I saw it. And no, never mind. That's just kidding. No, that seems like the meteorology community seems to be the inspiration for so many there with being Twister. But no, mine is actually similar to Stephen's in that it was really growing up in Florida, on the coast of Florida actually, and getting, just being there, it was just part of the fall experience was tracking hurricanes, and we would have the plot in the newspaper, and we're, putting each position on the page as they update it. And so weather in that sense has always been a part of me. And then didn't have to deal with too many tornadoes, fortunately. But then when I got to graduate school at the University of Florida, it was literally the day after my undergraduate graduation that I went with my research advisor at the time, who I'd just been doing a little bit of research with, and he somehow dragged me out to Tuscaloosa. That was in 2011, right after that event. And that really just opened my eyes to just the destruction, to the, what these storms can do. And, what really, I guess, piqued my curiosity as an engineer was just seeing how little we actually knew about tornadoes at the time and really understood what was going on and what we could do to prevent it. And so that really kicked off my master's and a PhD, and then it's really led into the work I'm doing now, both with hurricanes and tornadoes.
I forgot to say go Gators David.
Yes, go Gators.
I knew he was a Florida Gator person, as am I. I know Chris Jackson's kind of vomiting in his mouth right now.
Go Cox.
But anyway, we could talk SEC football all night long. Stephen, I think looking over some stuff, you've been involved or have some works with the Vortex Southeast mission that's been going on, kind of studying severe weather in the Southeast. We see these study groups go up from time to time, mainly out in the Plain States, but over the past couple of years, we've seen that research here in the Southeast. Could you tell us a little bit about that and maybe how that program, what the results of that program is starting to see with the way that we deal with severe weather here in the Southeast?
Yeah. So what we do know is the Vortex Southeast project was really the result of the 2011 April 27th tornado outbreak. Specifically, the NOAA sort of report that came out about that event was very much geared towards the social science side of things, which was, yes, we know that the ingredients were there. From a meteorological standpoint, it was a devastating event. But why did we see so many fatalities? And it was really the beginning of NOAA saying, let's focus on some of the social science behind these events as well. So that sort of started a federal mandate, and that's where this Vortex Southeast project, or this funding opportunity, came about. And largely what it's geared towards is getting physical scientists. And like myself, I would consider myself a physical scientist, and engineers like David and some others, as well as social scientists, coming together and studying tornadoes in the Southeast. And it stems largely from work that was done in the early mid 2000s by Walker Ashley at Northern Illinois, where we really, if we look at where tornadoes occur, the majority occur in the Central Plains, what we think of as Tornado Alley. But if we look at where the majority of tornado fatalities occur, it's the Southeast U.S. And that's because of that vulnerability factor that we just don't see in the Central Plains.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and hop in here and talk about what's kind of going to be one of the driving questions for the whole discussion tonight. What is, or I guess there's going to be multiple things, what are the biggest differences between the Plains and the Southeast when it comes to tornado breaks, both with the social science and with the the more physical science?
Yeah, and so this is a really great opportunity to sort of highlight the difference between sort of someone like David, who comes at these tornado events from a different standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, versus someone like me, who's a meteorologist and also has started working more and more with social science. And the big difference is tornado risk is relatively equal in these two regions. The Southeast gets a lot of tornadoes. The Central Plains gets a lot of tornadoes. There are some risk factors like more nighttime tornadoes in the Southeast. And by risk, I mean sort of meteorological ingredient factors. There's also, lower cloud bases, faster storm motions. Those things are a factor. But the big difference, I would point to, the first thing would be a greater population density in the Southeast. There's just a greater number of people. And I like to tell people, if you've driven through the heart of Alabama and you've driven through the heart of Kansas, put those two pictures in your mind and think about what happens if a tornado is planted in the middle of those states. Typically, the odds are greater that people are impacted in Alabama because of that increased population density. But there's other factors, too, that we see in the Southeast that we don't see in the Central Plains. A lot of it has to do with our manufactured and mobile housing. We just see a greater number. And of course, our research between David and I has started looking at other factors related to those mobile and manufactured homes, but also other factors like poverty of, single family, female head of households, non-white. All those factors that we know are related to socioeconomic vulnerability tend to sort of bullseye the Southeast. And that means a lot when it comes to tornado death probability or survivability, for that matter.
And Stephen, I'm going to hop in here and we're going to just keep on going with that. But, talking about the social sciences and the vulnerabilities, especially in the Southeast, a lot of folks may not know, but you did some really incredible stuff with the Beauregard, Alabama tornado earlier this year, and was able to, show where some of the fatalities occurred,
using GIS programs and also using the Trek data that was available from the National Weather Service. Just get you to talk about that a little bit and what you found.
Yeah, so this was a good example of where David and I were really able to work together. So it started off where sort of there was some bad weather that night, headed towards David, who's, I won't say he was lucky enough to be situated in Auburn, which was 10 miles from this tornado, Beauregard tornado event. And I just sent him a message that said, heads up, there's bad weather. And he was very aware. And then we sort of started the process of taking some online rotational GIS data, plotting mobile home data that I had developed over the last 2 years with this Vortex Southeast project, and giving that to David. And then really, I should pass it off to David here, because he was able to go out, conduct these surveys, and start thinking and start really assessing where people individually died for this particular event.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here and just say that, I echo Stephen's point there, and that this really was a perfect collaboration opportunity, unfortunately, for us, with this being, right here in our backyard and involving so many manufactured homes. Then what we're ultimately then hoping to get from this is really learn some lessons that can derive, some, learning, some advancements in knowledge from such a tragic event. But what was helpful in this was, Stephen had already done just a ton of work in Alabama overall, digitizing, every single mobile home, every single manufactured home throughout the state, as best as he could using aerial imagery. And so he already had this database of, here's where all these most vulnerable structures are. And so then when we overlay that with a path, as I'm going out, I already know what areas to target in terms of being able to, identify these and be able to go more efficiently and studying them. And so once we got out into the field, it was a little bit challenging because, and completely understandable, I'm not knocking this at all, but their access was very limited at first because it was such a first response. I mean, they were still searching for missing persons, 3-4 days after the event. And so it did take us a little while to get access, but once we were able to get in, we essentially went and tracked down every single fatality location down to the individual home, what type of home it was, anchorage, so on, who was living there, what happened. And that level of detail is really helping us be able to put these fatalities in a proper context, I think.
So I'm going to hop in. I'm going to ask, we talk about mobile homes, manufactured homes. Give us some breakdown what that means. Like how strong of a tornado does it take to flip a mobile home, a manufactured home? What sort of code is built into these to help mitigate some of this risk? Or is that even possible in some of these areas?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in first, and then Stephen, I know you've studied this quite a bit as well, so feel free to jump on anything that I've missed. But in terms of what wind speed, so nominally the manufactured homes or mobile homes, manufactured homes, they're split into two groups supposedly. So pre-1976 and then post-1976. And why that year is so key is because that's when Housing and Urban Development, HUD, is when they issued their, basically their regulations for the manufacturing and installation of these mobile homes. And so the general notion is anything built after or installed after 1976 is considered a manufactured home. And so how they do it is there's essentially 3 zones. So there's the zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. Zone 2 and zone 3 are primarily your coastal counties. And really the only designation is what wind speed they're nominally designed to. So as you get to zone 2 and 3, depends on how you characterize the wind speed, but I believe zone 2 is 100 mile an hour kind of sustained wind, and zone 3 is 110, if I'm remembering that right off the top of my head. So zone 1 is where the majority of the U.S. is. And for example, in Alabama, all but 2 counties, Baldwin and Mobile, are in this zone 1. And so that's essentially 90 mile an hour sustained wind, but you get into all sorts of complexities when you start talking about what that actually means in a tornado. So there are some regulations in place for it, but in terms of what wind speed it actually would take to, knock one of these over or flip it over, I'll just for context, we haven't studied just the Beauregard tornado. We actually also spent time in several other tornadoes this year in Alabama. And for example, there was a tornado in Kingville, up in kind of the northwest part of Alabama. And it was an EF0, maybe EF1, and completely lofted and flipped this manufactured home over and threw it into the trees. There was another one just a few weeks ago, actually down in Troy, Alabama, where a EF0 tornado, according to the National Weather Service, their best estimate, and I'm not disagreeing with that at all, went through a trailer park, a manufactured home park, and actually flipped over 4 or 5 different manufactured homes. And we're talking, 85, 80 mile an hour, maybe 90 mile an hour winds. So it does not take a whole lot to knock these over, especially when you're close to the center of the tornado, where you get some of those strong updrafts as well. So there's certainly some aerodynamics and all that we don't quite understand as well as we would like it, also. But in general, no, it does not take a whole lot of wind to waft, many of these manufactured homes.
Understood. And Stephen, I've got this graphic up from you from a tweet you put out some time ago. This product that you worked very hard on. We appreciate it. Can you talk a little bit to this one?
Yeah, this is really built off of the Vortex Southeast research that I did, which David alluded to, where I was able to map the precise location of roughly about 90% of the mobile homes in Alabama, which is around about 175,000 mobile homes. And that's something we haven't been able to do before. And what I was actually able to do is, and we're looking at an aggregated view here on the panel on the left, which is, if there was just a bunch of black dots on the map, you couldn't see anything. So I've looked at a frequency grid here. And what it really points to is this idea that specifically in what we would see in the southeast portion of Alabama, a lot of people have referred to this area as the East Coast Gulf Plain. This is largely where agricultural areas. There's a lot of descendants from slavery and a lot of very poor individuals that are living in rural conditions. Unfortunately, we do have mobile homes in those locations too. So the gist of this graph or of this map is saying that, if I had to say what's the difference between mobile manufactured housing in the Southeast versus the Central Plains, when we see mobile homes in the Central Plains like Kansas or Oklahoma, they're found in mobile home communities or parks. They're found near each other. It's not that we don't see that in Alabama. We do have mobile home parks in Alabama, and quite a few of them, but we also see them peppered throughout the landscape. And specifically, if we look at factors like race, sex, age, income, all these vulnerability factors, they overlay hand in hand with where we see the greatest concentration of rural. So these mobile homes that are isolated in southeastern Alabama. And I would argue that that's probably the most vulnerable group or fatality prone group. And if we overlaid the Beauregard event, we would see a pretty high frequency of these rural mobile homes. David could correct me, but I'm not sure that a single mobile home park was hit by the Beauregard event, although a majority of homes that were affected, or almost a majority of homes that were affected, were manufactured housing in that event. So this highlights the big issue that we see in Alabama that we don't see in places like Oklahoma or Kansas.
Correct. And yeah, I'll just confirm that with what Stephen said, in that there were a couple of smaller mobile home parks that were kind of on the periphery of the tornado, more so towards Smith Station, towards the eastern half of the tornado. But where it was strongest, it was primarily these isolated rural mobile homes.
And Stephen, we've got one of your tweets up, and you're kind of showing the rotation track over that map that you had assembled with mobile homes. Talk to us, and David, I think you were the actual boots on the ground, so both of y'all can probably talk about this. We saw a majority of those deaths were in the mobile homes, but there was actually a few site-built homes that also we saw deaths in.
Yeah, so I'll start off and pass it off to David. This is just a prettier version, cleaned up version of the map that I sent David that night and said, this is where, the MRMS, sort of the stuff that's coming out of NSSL, the radar-derived products are highlighting where there was strong rotation, and we know there was a tornado. So I sent this, and I think one of the slides or one of the versions of this image has the mobile homes overlaid on it, and gave that to David where he could have a good starting location. And What was the second half to your question? I'm sorry.
And some of these we saw were mobile homes.
Oh,
But we
okay.
actually saw some homes, just regular built homes as well.
Yeah, so I'll pass that one off to David because any information that I gained from this event was from David with the boots on the ground.
Yeah. So first off, I'd like to, I guess, make a point here that when we talk about, site built and mobile homes, we tend to, almost as we do with everything else in culture nowadays, kind of view it as this binary black and white. You're either in a mobile home or you're in a site built. But in reality, when you're looking at it from an engineering perspective, there's a whole spectrum of vulnerability that goes from, very, very poorly built and poorly installed mobile homes, to very poorly built and, unanchored site built homes to, well built, well anchored homes. So there's, so when you look then at some of these, there were, as far as we know, there was at least one fatality in a traditional site built home. There were a couple others that were that, to the best of our knowledge, were in a modular home, which is kind of in between a site built and a manufactured home, and that is not built there on site. So it doesn't follow, or it does follow the local codes, but it's kind of brought in. So it's a little bit of a different situation there. But the fatality that we did see in a for sure site built home, was a very old, I believe it was a 1950s home that was literally, sitting on nothing but a pile of bricks. There's, we like to think or give the illustration for engineering purposes for resisting wind. You want to think about, can I pick that home up by the foundation, by the ground, and flip it upside down? Is it going to be able to stay in place? If it can stay in place, it has what we call a vertical load path that is so critical in resisting these loads. And so whether it's a site-built home or a manufactured home, the common thread was that fatalities occurred in homes that had very little or no anchorage. And I think that's the consistent message that needs to come out, regardless of whether it's a manufactured home or a site-built home.
And so, Stephen, my next question to you, which you guys have done a lot of this research with your Vortex Southeast project, is the social science behind this. This was an EF4 tornado, so this was a strong tornado, which would likely occur with deaths no matter where the storm could have passed through. But how do we get this information out to people? And David, maybe you can chime in on this as well, because you were actually there with boots on the ground. What was it like? What did these people tell you? And Stephen, what is the research showing about how to get this severe weather information out to people?
Yeah, so the other half, or the other third of David and I's, so sort of our Vortex Southeast work, is we're working with social scientists as well. So we have Mike Ignato, who's at the Walter Reed Institute for Research, and then we have Kevin Ash, who's at University of Florida as an assistant professor, and also Kim Cloko-McLean, who's at Sims OU in Norman. So those three have really worked hard on interviewing individuals who live in these manufactured homes, or at least interviewing individuals that are experiencing tornadoes in the Southeast. And what we're learning is that there's an important emphasis on how they're perceiving these tornado warnings and how they're acting. We know that, if any of us received a tornado warning at this moment, we all would react completely differently. We're much more weather aware than others. The previous thought was that mobile home residents just were very ignorant to what was going on weather-wise. We're finding out in recent years that that's not the case. They know as much, if not more, than the general permanent home resident, but they lack the ability or the ability to go out and make the right decision to, heed the tornado watch and get to safety. They know their homes aren't safe, but they freeze. They don't know what to do. So we're learning a lot about their decision-making. And that's incredibly important, because we can issue all the tornado warnings we want, but if we don't understand the individual decision-making, or we don't enforce stronger building codes, we're never going to increase survivability and reduce the loss of life.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that with a couple of perspectives that I had while I was out there. And I actually was fortunate enough to spend some time with Daphne Wadu, who's at the University of Oklahoma as well. And she also was doing interviews of not just manufactured home residents, but any. And what really stood out to me was just how many of the survivors relied upon physical or environmental cues. to actually do something. So I think that ties back even to the whole, the vulnerability in the Southeast, where it's so much more difficult to actually put your eyes on the tornado or have a friend, putting their eyes on the tornado, that it kind of, as Stephen was saying, they may freeze in those situations. Well, is it really a tornado? Is it too late for me to actually leave and go somewhere safe? What do I do? And then at that point, it really is too late, because then you start hearing wind picking up and debris hitting the house and so forth. So I think there's certainly some challenges there, and I think the other big education point that we've got to work on from an engineering standpoint is just this feeling of hopelessness, of saying it's an EF tornado. Yes, it destroyed everything in its path, so there's nothing you can do. And there's plenty of research and there's plenty of case studies that I can point to, even in the Beauregard tornado, to say, yes, building codes matter. A stronger building matters. Will it experience no damage at all in the very center of the tornado path? No, but can it protect? Or can it greatly enhance your odds of surviving? Yes, absolutely. And it's all about kind of what is our target performance. Our target performance for a manufactured home isn't going to be to, survive an EF4 tornado unscathed, but can we at least prevent it from being wafted in 100-mile-an-hour winds and just getting torn apart and having basically zero chance of survival for occupants? Yes, we can do better than that. So it's kind of getting out of this binary or this hopeless feeling and actually saying, yes, we can do things to improve the survivability of all homes, not just manufactured.
Chris, I want to bring you in on this because I know this is a very passionate subject for you. And in fact, you and Stephen are actually on Weather Brains talking about this as well. But you have experience in this. You, out of all of us, I would say on the panel, you're a firefighter. You're a public servant for 15 some years. And this is something we talked about last week at the Hurricane Awareness Tour. What's your thoughts on this? Why is it some people take this seriously and some don't?
Well, this may be a little bit more controversial topic, but I think it comes down to a couple things. I myself grew up in a mobile home. I was, this demographic of people. I really was. And so I totally understand where a lot of this is coming from. And you look in the Southeast, there's a lot of issues. There's no, there's not communities every 5 miles like there are in Kansas. So you get these mobile homes that are spread out, 10, 20 minutes from the nearest town. Then on top of that, it's just people maybe are becoming complacent to warnings. They just don't take it seriously. And that was something I ran into as a firefighter. And, something about my experiences, people love to tell you the truth, at least the fire department, because they always loved us. And it just comes down to personal responsibility. Some people don't have the ability to, and that's terrible. And I hate it just as much as the next person does. But there are some people that just they don't listen to the warning. They don't heed the warning. And it comes down to a lot of other simple things too. I mean, just reading a map. Knowing where you are on a map. If there's a tornado warning nearby, just knowing where you are. Does that affect you? I think there's a lot of things that go into it, but it's a tough, and I don't think there's one simple answer.
Yeah, if I can jump in real quick, that would be great. Actually, Kim Cloco McLean has done some great work in the last few months looking at sort of asking people, can they place themselves on a map? And very few people actually know where they are in the county. They don't have a good sense of direction. They don't have a good sense of where they're located. And that's really interesting because if we're asking mobile home residents to flee their home for better shelter, they may drive right into the tornado. And I think they know that. So that increases their sort of desire to stay and take their chance. The other thing that's really interesting is, and David alluded to this, which was, we know for a fact that almost every single person that gets a tornado warning seeks secondary confirmation. They look at their phone, they go turn on the TV, they do something to say, is this really happening? And with the Beauregard event, one thing that we cannot say, or one thing that we can say without a doubt, is that the media, the National Weather Service, did a great job. Every single person that I know of that was down there there was nobody that said we didn't get the warning. They all had the warning. They all came to some understanding that they were in trouble, or at least there was a tornado on the way. And that's incredibly important because we still ended up with people dying. So we know that there's something happening going from receiving the warning and then actually taking action. And that's, some people wouldn't see that as encouraging, but that allows us to make the next decision to figure out what to do when we are starting to figure out what decision-making is going on.
Right, Stephen. And to follow up with that, you're exactly right. You know, the Facebook page that I run, that I've been running for a few years now, you know, when I post a warning that comes directly from the National Weather Service that has all the information in it, I will usually bet 8 out of 10 times the first comment is going to be, is it going to hit my house? I mean, and sometimes, you know, I have some friends that like to play jokes, but, you know, for the most part, I know it's people that are being serious. They really don't know. And the confirmation bias can be the greatest thing in the world, or it could be the biggest. It could be the reason that you don't survive an event. And, you know, you just have to trust that when a warning comes out, it's there for a reason, you know, to heed it. And it's just tough. I mean, it's a lot of small things that go wrong all at the wrong time that lead to, you know, bad things happening. It's just a series of small mistakes.
I'll point out here one, really, it was just kind of one of those encouraging anecdotal stories that kind of warmed my heart amidst all the, you know, destruction and chaos. There was, I visited a manufactured home. It was within the tornado path, but kind of on the right hand side, a little bit outside the worst damage. But I was talking with the mother, and she said that they, you know, the warning, you know, they knew that they were, you know, some bad weather coming and weren't sure. But it was actually her son, who I believe was 12 or 13 years old, was literally on the computer on a site tracking the radar itself and saying, nope, we need to go shelter. And like, that's such an awesome story that, you know, that there are young people out there, and some that have, you know, an awareness like this, to whether they receive a warning or not, to be able to know it and go, you know, tell their family to go seek shelter because they're, you know, using some of those secondary cues.
I think that's a great point. We're talking about Alabama. James Spann, well-known meteorologist in Alabama, I believe I heard him say a couple of weeks ago, you know, he goes and visits school every day that school's in session. And one of his things is he puts a map up of Alabama and asks the students if they can point to where they live at. And that's something I've adopted in my school talks, as well as, you know, geography. You need to know where you are, first of all, so you know what to do. Another kind of controversial subject in this discussion is storm shelters, Stephen. And we know Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, places like that, they have storm shelters, but that's not the case here in the Southeast, and it may not be as available for us in the Southeast. As you were talking about, the population here is, I hate to say it, but some of them can't afford these storm shelters. They're quite expensive.
Yeah, that's I wish I could talk more about this, and this is very parallel to some of Daphne Ledoux's work at OU and the National Weather Center. But, you know, I have a paper right now that's sort of in the hidden sort of review land, wherever it goes, and people are reviewing that now for publication, and it's with Kevin Ash. And one thing that we're pointing to is we're very quick to say, you know, the National Weather Service and FEMA both recommend that if you're in a mobile home and there's a tornado coming, you need to get out. And individuals know that. And of course, getting out means a lot of different things. Do they have access to a vehicle? Does that mean run to their neighbors? Does that mean drive to the nearest shelter? So I started asking questions with all this great geospatial data that I have now and saying, well, where is the nearest shelter? And what type of shelters are they? And what I found out was most of these counties, specifically in northern Alabama, have made a considerable effort since 2011 to build FEMA-rated shelters, where they're community shelters where individuals can go. You know, they get opened up during a tornado watch, and they go take shelter in those locations. And potentially, they're a great avenue for survivability. Where that breaks down are those communities that are sort of poverty-stricken. A lot of counties in southeastern Alabama are living sort of with a very small budget, if but any budget at all. Most of them don't have any, you know, if they had money to build a storm shelter, they would use it to fix the roads. They would use it for a lot of other factors. And one thing that, we're sort of starting to figure out, and I think in the next few years, where my research is headed, is starting to figure out why shelters may not be the end all be all or the perfect solution to tornado survivability. They're expensive. And I know a lot of these counties are going to be asking questions about, where do we put the shelter? Our individuals in our county are spread out. And we know that based on my data that says that, mobile homes are peppered throughout the landscape. So where do you put the shelter? Who opens the shelter? Who's paying for it? Who's upkeeping it? There's a lot of questions that we need to answer. But one thing that we do know is that if mobile home residents are taking action during the tornado watch portion and getting to a safe shelter, that's the best bet for survivability. That's the number one suggestion I would give to people, which is, you see a tornado watch, you live in a mobile home, you need to take action and be prepared, because you don't want to be caught in this fight or flight sort of mentality.
Definitely so. And, once that watch is issued, watches are hours, mornings are just minutes. Yeah. So it may be too late. I want to shift gears just a little bit, David. I know some of your research obviously is with tornadoes, but you also talked about some hurricanes and things like that. I know you've have been in contact with some work with Hurricane Harvey and Irma and Maria and Michael, and wind vulnerability along the coastlines. And Shay and Jared both live in the Charleston area and the hurricane-prone area. Can you talk a little bit about your research in the tropics area?
Yeah, so this it's really a related. We're looking at wind vulnerability, and certainly there's different vulnerabilities in more the inland areas versus the coastal areas. But spent quite a bit of time, like I said, at Harvey, Irma, Michael, and supportive efforts, and after Hurricane Florence. And a lot of this now is wrapped up in something called the Structural Extreme Events Reconnaissance Network, which is something founded by the National Science Foundation and led by Dr. Kajussi-Corey up at Notre Dame. And so the basic idea of this is organizing the structural engineering community's response to these disasters, and really to be able to maximize the efficiency, the quality, and so forth of the data that we're able to collect, this perishable data that we're able to collect, so that ultimately we can learn from it. That's our ultimate objective. And so, we've spent quite a bit of time here after these hurricanes and documenting, okay, what's the difference? What is the impact of building codes? This is unfortunately, a perfect laboratory to be able to very clearly see what a difference building codes can make. And, the significance is obvious in most cases, when you're looking at this older construction versus newer construction and just the different types of damage that we observe. So it's been really enlightening, and it does have carryover, over into tornadoes as well.
David, you're talking about all those different storms between Harvey and Michael and all that. And as you all have been going through your research, have you noticed that there have been any significant changes in the way that the social science works with regards to tornadoes?
Say again, you said in regards to the social science?
Yeah, so have people's opinions on these or on the dangers changed, and have they become a little bit wiser as they've seen the damage that these storms have caused?
Yeah, I think both for hurricanes and tornadoes, yes, certainly, after these really active seasons, there is certainly a heightened awareness of a vulnerability of sheltering and do I need to evacuate and so on. But there's been quite a bit of research that has also found that there's after a certain amount of time, it just begins to kind of fade away, those memories, and it's not as big of a deal. The retention is not always what we think it is for some of these storms. And so unfortunately you get situations like I was just reviewing a study today that my colleague Dr. Kajussi-Corey at Notre Dame had done in coastal North Carolina. Actually, I think it was New Hanover County or one of the counties that had been impacted by Florence. And they had done this study before the hurricane hit, so about a year before Florence came. It was sometime in 2017 that they did this study where they're interviewing homeowners and saying, do you know whether you have, impact rated or wind rated garage doors, and do you have protection over your windows, and some of these kind of fundamental mitigation practices. And we're finding that not only did many of the people, the homeowners, not know about these things, most of them had no intention of doing anything to protect themselves either, even being in these vulnerable areas. And so, you'd love to go back now after the hurricane and run that same study and see how that's changed. But even I would expect things to change, but how long it's retained and how much it actually affects behavior is still something that, unfortunately isn't quite what we'd like it to be.
So before we wrap up here, a little last question. What can we expect from you guys in the future with your research? What can people expect?
I'll go ahead and jump in then here.
Yeah,
so with regards to the I guess the specific issue is related to the Beauregard tornado. Really, these field studies that we've conducted is just the beginning of what we're trying to do with this tornado. And I really think we have the potential to advance some fundamental knowledge out of this. One being, we've gone now and we've conducted these detailed assessments. We've documented, what type of anchorage systems is present in many of these manufactured homes, looking at vulnerability, looking at some really interesting, good case studies that have come out of this as well, both for site-built and manufactured homes. And now we're working to essentially put this in the proper perspective. So, okay, we see a home that performed better than what we had originally thought. Why? Is it characteristics of the tornado itself that changed? Is it terrain around it that changed? Is it something to do with topography in tornadoes? There's a lot of these other factors that go into it. And so we're really trying to unpack some of these factors that relate to the more detailed aspects of tornado vulnerability for site-built and manufactured homes. And that's really a thread that kind of carries over into a lot of my work, both with tornadoes and hurricanes, is really unpacking and very fine scale some of these factors that are influencing the individual vulnerability of a specific home. And it's just because we see so much variability. There's such a lack of uniformity in the damage patterns, and we're trying to understand that better.
Yeah, and sort of to piggyback off of that, along with that work that David and I continue to collaborate on, and he looks at it from different viewpoints as myself, and we're very open to sharing these results and working together to unpack these details. The other aspect that sort of is always my eye on the prize in terms of long-term view of my research is we're now in this realm where we have the data to start asking questions about the combination of climate change and also sort of the environmental or climate change that we're seeing on the environmental factors related to severe weather, as well as the societal change. So people like Jeff Trapp at University of Illinois, Victor Gensini at Northern Illinois University, and some others that are running these models to help us say, okay, what do we expect severe weather to do in the next 30, 40 years underneath of a warming world? But at the same time, when we talk about disasters, we have to look at what's going on societal wise. How are cities growing? How are they expanding? What's happening with these vulnerability trends? Are we seeing more mobile homes, greater gaps in wages? There's a lot of factors that increase the vulnerability of these residents that are going on at the same time. So looking at those two factors and how they're changing together and how that's affecting future disaster potential is something that, I'm going to continue to focus on inside of tornadoes, hail, wildfires. The disasters go on and on and on, whether they're meteorological or geophysical themselves. So we now live in a world where we can start doing that. And that's really kind of groundbreaking. We've only been able to do that in the last handful of years, start looking at these disasters from a more holistic standpoint.
Well, Stephen and David, we certainly appreciate you spending some time with us, and a really great conversation tonight. And one that we hope will be able to continue to find ideas and help people stay safe during severe weather. For those of who may be watching tonight or listening on the podcast, if they want to find more of your research or maybe following you on social media as you tweet out new and ideas and maps and things like that. We didn't even get into your maps, Stephen. I know that that you work a lot with. How can they follow you all?
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Okay, the best one for me is just going to be on Twitter. I try to stay fairly active on there. I'm more active in terms of posting when there's an event going on, but I would love to continue the conversation on Twitter with anyone who's had some insights and had some questions. I found it a great tool for engagement. So if you search for my name, or I think Scotty, my Twitter handle. I don't know if you'd be able to just drop that in the chat or something else, but find me on Twitter. I'd be more than happy to engage and continue discussions there.
We can definitely do that. And Stephen?
Yeah, sort of the same for me. I tend to, David and I retweet each other quite a bit, especially when we have these overlapping events. I tend to not do as much field work as him, so I'm sort of tweeting the spatial analyses and a lot of different perspectives. So you can find me on Twitter as just Stephen M. Strader. And then also my website is pretty much always up to date with latest publications, graduate student opportunities, and in general, just the ability for people who want to reach out to me when I'm at Villanova in terms of research and teaching. So that's just stephenmstrader.org. And of course, that's all available online. If you just look me up, you'll find me.
Awesome. Well, guys, again, thank you for your research. I speak for myself. It's fascinating. The days after the Alabama tornado, the stuff that you guys were producing was just really top notch, and I appreciate the work you've put into it, and hope that we don't have any more major weather events like this. But I know that you guys are going to be there and always going to be researching it and trying to help people out to survive these events. Guys, stick around if you want to. We're going to shift gears just a little bit. I'm assuming, Jared, are you ready for weather news, or do you want to get a weather roundtable first?
Let's do a little news.
All right, off to you then.
Yeah, let's do a little news. How's everybody doing this evening? Thank you guys again for joining us. Rather enjoyed your episode of Weather Brains with Chris on it. Actually, it was one of those Weather Podcast Month episodes, so that was really good. But we're going to start our news segment here with me sharing my screen and talking about tornadoes. Yes. Tornado season has gotten off to a very active start in the Carolinas, particularly in North Carolina. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some damage paths here. So this was surveyed by the National Weather Service in Raleigh. This is on May 11th. This is over the weekend. Tornado in Stanley County, North Carolina. So EF1 tornado on the ground for about a little over a mile, max with a couple football fields, about 3 football fields or so. Nobody hurt, nobody killed. But so that was associated with a severe weather outbreak that we kind of saw coming. The 13th tornado decidedly was not. And don't worry, it wasn't just us that were kind of caught off guard. It was also the Storm Prediction Center. Yeah, I think everybody.
Monday.
The magic of boundaries. This is why you do the analyses in the morning. The magic of these boundaries. Yeah, we had the EF2 tornado developed. It went right through Wake and Nash counties in Raleigh's county warning area. And what was interesting about this is that it was a general risk. I don't even think Raleigh was in a risk area. I think they were in like a no thunder area. Little boundary sets up, a little bit of convergence, a little bit of wind shear, and that's all you need. And it dropped an EF2 tornado. Fortunately, nobody was hurt or killed. Warnings went out. Everyone was fine. But it's just go ahead.
And Jared, I was going to say the Raleigh KRD or whatever the radar say, their radar was out during this event.
Yes, it was. The radar was out. They were relying on the terminal Doppler RDU at the airport there, and also probably borrowing from not from Blacksburg, but from Morehead City and from maybe even probably Wilmington at some point too. So suffice to say, it was a very challenging environment for severe weather and tornado detection. But those terminal Dopplers, I tell you what, 1 minute updates. I mean, 1 minute updates, high resolution, really can't go wrong with those. They're there to detect wind shear, and boy, did they do a good job of it. But yeah, this thing is I mean, what's crazy about this EF2 that went through Wake and Nash counties on the ground for 17 miles. I mean, it was a longer track tornado than the one that was actually in the severe weather event that they expected. So, it's always kind of interesting how these work out. And in addition to the tornado, there was baseball size hail all over the place. There was hail in downtown Raleigh. I saw several friends from Raleigh tweeting about this. So some big hail, some in a tornado. I mean, and again, these kinds of things. When we say, severe thunderstorms can and will produce tornadoes with little or no warning, this is exactly what that is like. But again, the Weather Service in Raleigh did a phenomenal job getting the warnings out to people and getting this rather interesting setup, identifying it, and then SPC issued a severe thunderstorm watch and just painted in a little slight risk towards the end of that event. So it was interesting. It was definitely an interesting day on radar, to put it mildly. So down in South Carolina, we've got some new OPCONs. We used to operate on a 5-level scale at the Emergency Management Division, but they've decided to whittle that down to 3. And so make that a little easier on people. It's a little easier to understand 3 levels versus 5. So OPCON 3, everyday operations. 78 degrees, sunny like we've had today in Charleston. OPCON 3 weather. Gotta love it. OPCON 2, okay, when we start bringing some people in, we're going to start looking at some emergency plans here. That's kind of like if we got to turn on parts of the EOC, that's when we're going to do it. And then OPCON 1 is where it's going to happen, is where it's happening. Disaster is imminent. The EOC is open. Everyone's activated, ready to go. So whatever storm is happening, hurricanes, things like that, it's happening. So 3 OPCONs, again, it really in daily life, it's not something that you have to worry about what level the Emergency Operations Center is activated at, but it's something that people find interesting. It's something that gets reported in the media. It's something that gets that's out there, and everybody wants to know what's the OPCON. So they've simplified this a bit. And finally, we're going to go down to Arkansas. We're going to go take a little jog west. And this made the rounds on Twitter this week. And I rather like this use of electronic billboards to broadcast tornado warnings. And this is something that was first brought out. Let me make sure I credit the source here properly. I had it up here for a second ago. And of course, me and my propensity to close windows. So this is out of Channel 5 out in Arkansas. Let me get you some call letters there. But they talked to a billboard company about how they use polygon warnings, and they use them to show tornado warning billboards. People are listening to their iPods. iPods. That's so 2010. They're listening to they listen to satellite radio. They might be listening to audiobooks. Yeah, I mean, audiobooks, things like that. And so the billboards catch a lot of attention. It's a great use of electronic billboard. And I guess the only other 2 options that we had, Evan was thinking, don't park under overpasses. And my personal favorite would be drive south. So that would
I think this is a great idea. I mean, you got a lot of folks out driving, and for those states that allow billboards, I'm seeing more and more of these pop up. So I mean, what a great way to reach everybody on the road to let them know, something's up. We see it time and time again where there's a tornado occurring right near a road, and people they're just kind of clueless. They have no idea to even look around, look out to the side. I mean, they're focused, which is great. They're focusing on the car in front of them, but to have a billboard up there, something bigger to give them the warning, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, we look at that. I mean, that's pretty hard to miss. I mean, that's that really drives it home there. So Ashby Street Outdoor Advertising, hats off to y'all out in Arkansas. Thank you to KFSM and KXNW out in Arkansas for that report. Scotty, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Jared, for that. We could be seeing some more of those tornado billboards going on. I'll bring in Chris Jackson here, our resident severe weather expert. Chris, portions of the plains and looking at the potential for seeing some severe weather over the next few days.
Yeah, absolutely, Scotty. setting up for the next 7 to really out through the next 14 days probably. There's going to be good chances of severe weather across the midwestern part of the country, and that's partly due because this ridge is starting to set up over the southeast. For the folks that enjoyed the cool weather this morning, I hope you enjoyed it because it's pretty much over. Looking ahead to the next 7 days here in the southeast, we're going to be in the 90s every day and unseasonably warm at night also, with temps running about 7 to 8 degrees above normal each day. But shifting back over to the Midwest, yesterday was the first time since the Storm Prediction Center started putting out 8-day forecasts that every day was an enhanced risk or I'm not going to say enhanced, but they had a highlighted risk for severe weather in every product going out to from day 1 all the way to day 8, and that's the first time since they've started putting those products out that that's happened. So I think it really points to what's coming in the Midwest over the next week or so. And it looks like for our little Chasecation trip up at the end of the month that pattern is still going to hold pretty true with the ridge over the southeast and southwest flow over the Midwest.
It better. Let's bring in Shay. Shay, I want to peg your interest on the tropics, anything going there, and then I want to kind of have us Chris, Evan, and I, we can kind of talk a little bit about the hurricane awareness tour last week, and then anything else you guys want to discuss. So Shay, anything brewing in the tropics or anything like that?
We're watching a little bit of a signal. It's in tandem with what's called the Madden-Julian oscillation. It's the MJO phase, which is it's an oscillation that sort of allows for less upper shear in the atmosphere in a certain area, and so we have a little bit of an aggregate of activity starting to show up in modeling towards the end of the month, but it's still 2 weeks out. We're not entirely certain if it's consistent and it holds. We may be looking at some activity in the Western Caribbean, if not the Eastern Pacific, transferring some energy in that direction. Just an area to watch right now. It might be a hot spot right out the gate. If we get through the month of May without any named tropical systems, would be the first time since 2014 we've gotten through May without a named storm. So that's all we have right now. Everything's pretty quiet everywhere else. We have like Chris said, this large ridge out over the Atlantic, so that's going to keep the southeast and a southerly warm sector. Any fronts that come may be held inland, so you may end up with some prolonged periods of rain from the Midlands up to the Highlands. For any of these fronts that drop into the region, they'll just stall, and so that we kind of get into that pattern as well. But at least the tropics are pretty quiet overall. So.
And Shay, not to put you on the spot, but I would assume with this ridge kind of parking over the southeast, we'll really see those ocean temperatures really start to warm up over the next few weeks.
No, that's absolutely right. We're about 76 degrees in the Charleston area. We're about low to mid 70s up all southeast North Carolina, mid 70s, mid upper 70s in Georgia. And as the air temperatures climb, once we start getting those low, when you start seeing the mean averages in the 80s, that's when the sea surface temperatures are going to climb up to that number. That typically, when you get a prolonged event like this, you'll see those mean temperatures between your lows at night and your highs in the day. Whatever that medium is, you're going to see the sea surface temps really kind of edge right along that, especially along the coastal shelf waters where they sort of normalize to that pattern.
And then Evan, Chris, I'll bring you guys in. We last Thursday had the opportunity to join the National Hurricane Center along with the forecast offices in Greer, South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, as well as a lot of broadcast meteorologists throughout North and South Carolina. And Center brought the Hurricane Awareness Tour to the Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Us three, were able to be there and kind of talk with some of the pilots and crew members of the Hurricane Hunters and some of the staff of the Hurricane Center. Any takeaways that you guys got from that?
I was absolutely impressed. I didn't realize that the National Hurricane Center only had 43 employees, and you think about the amount of responsibility placed upon those 43 employees is absolutely gargantuan. And so hearing that and being able to talk to the director of the National Hurricane Center, Mr. Ken Graham, that was great. It was a good experience. Getting to meet the flight crew, enjoyed all of it.
And to add to that, Chris, talking about Ken Graham and meeting him, it's actually really interesting and nice how he really took a lot of our, the stuff that we talked about into consideration as they're debating ideas about the cone of uncertainty and stuff like that, and the Saffir-Simpson scale. So they're not only a staff of only 43, but they're a staff of 43 that are pretty much constantly striving to update their systems to be the best that they are.
I was going to echo what you said, Evan. Ken Graham, a super fantastic guy, and I know that we're all in good hands with him running the Hurricane Center. One thing they were kind of stressing on was the inland effects of landfalling tropical systems and flooding, as we all know from Matthew and Florence, and even the flood event, not directly associated with Joaquin back in 2015, but we've had several inland flood threats throughout the past 4 or 5 years here in the Carolinas, and that was a big point they wanted to stress last week. Was even if you don't live along the coast, you still have to take these landfalling tropical systems seriously because of the flood threat. A lot of statistics coming out. I will tell you, we were able to capture a lot of content, and I know Chris is continuing to work on that content. We've got a couple more interviews we're trying to turn out, but be looking throughout the few months for a hurricane special from us. Some great conversations that we had, and I will tell you that Ken Graham is agreed to come on the show. We're probably going to have him on after the hurricane season, but he is a very open guy, loves dialogue, and a big asset. So we're looking forward to that. Finally, I want to bring in Peter. Peter, you've been gone a while. I know you've been going through the school thing. How's that been going for you?
Oh, just great. The stress is just wonderful. I love it. But it's been like a monsoon up here since April, to be honest. We had 2 tornado watches issued in April, which is pretty rare for us. I mean, we get maybe 1 a year, if even that. But to get 2 within 2 weeks was pretty incredible. But luckily, nothing too major happened with that. But just recently, it's been the ton of rain that we've had. Pretty much since April, we've had almost 7 inches of rain. And practically every weekend, we've had some kind of measurable rain. So luckily, this weekend, it's looking sunny, knock on wood, till I jinx it. And we're staying in the upper 70s through low 80s all the way through next week. So I think the chillier weather is finally going away. We were stuck in the 50s for much of this week. So it looks like we're finally staying warm. The rainy pattern is going to break, and we're going to see a lot more sun than precip. So thank God for that.
This is good news. Well, we are going to go ahead and log off. We appreciate you watching tonight here on the Carolina Weather Group. Next week, we'll have Jared Rennie on. He works for NC State. He's a climatologist, and going to be talking about some unique things that they are doing here on the show. So we will see you back here next Wednesday night for another episode of the Carolina Weather Group. You guys have a great weekend. Stay cool out there as it really heats up over the southeast.